place on the agency of Hmong women, and a monograph on war and memory among Hmong pilots, which is also coming out next year. All right, so that's your round.
Thank you so much, Ahmed and Kenan, for inviting me to moderate today. It is indeed really a pleasure for me because the issue of refugee is very personal. It's not only just the research I've done for the last 20 years, but I was a refugee child myself from the Vietnam War era and have lived in a refugee camp, came to the U.S. when I was 9 years old. So these are lived experiences I've had, as well as learning about the stories of people who are displaced from their homes due to war all over the world. So it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for being here on a Friday afternoon. So the best thing about being the moderators is that I get to introduce our distinguished panelists. I'm going to introduce all of them at once, and then they will speak, and we don't have a particular order. I mean, we can go in the order that's on the list if you like, so I will let the panelists decide if that's okay. So don't be shy, feel free to offer to go whenever you'd like. Our first panelist is Mette Brogden. She has a PhD in anthropology from the University of Arizona. She's the state refugee coordinator for the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. Her research focuses on the perspective of refugees, receiving communities and governments, and resettlement and integration. Our next speaker is Anwar Sallumi, who is the Refugee Programs Coordinator and Data Analyst from the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. He has over 9 years working with refugees, and he himself is a refugee from Iraq. And then next is Barb Graham. She's the Director of Catholic Charities, Legal Services for Immigrants. She's been a practicing attorney on immigration law and working with refugees for over 16 years. Next is Patrick Thein. He is a case manager with Catholic Charities as well, over 6 years of experience with them. He's a Korean refugee from Burma or Myanmar. He is actually in the process of creating a Korean community association, one of the many ways that immigrant or refugee communities find ways to help their communities. So we wish him luck with that. And then we also have Va Yang. She's the domestic violence case manager with the Hmong American Women's Association here in Milwaukee. She has 7 years of experience working with Hawa. She has been, and in fact, was involved in the very first Hmong bilingual 24/7 helpline. And this is the first ever in the United States to provide around-the-clock advocacy for Hmong women who are facing many challenges in their families. In 2012, she won the Courage Award from the Governor's Council on Domestic Abuse. So a lot of really important work she's done. She's also a trainer with the Wisconsin Women's Training Institute. And our last two panelists, they are our respondents. So after our panelists speak, we have invited two panelists to respond to some of the issues that our panelists will raise. The first is Kalyani Rai. She has a PhD from UW-Madison, is an associate professor in educational policy and community studies here at UWM. She has over 20 years of experience working with refugee and immigrant populations here in Milwaukee. She's the co-editor of the Journal of Southeast Asian Education and Advancement, a really important journal for Southeast Asian works, scholarly work. She serves on the Refugee Advisory Council of Wisconsin, on the Wisconsin Educational Research Advisory Council, and was a co-founder of the Hmong American Women's Association, and has a current book project on refugees in urban America. So very important work. We look forward to that. And last but not least is Omar Mohamed. He's a caseworker with Lutheran Social Services of Wisconsin's Refugee Resettlement Program. He's also a MSW student here at UWM, and he was a refugee from Somalia. He has been working in the refugee area for over 2 years. So I want to welcome all the panelists. Again, we could go in the order that I introduced you, if you like, if you feel like that might be a little bit more orderly. Does that sound okay? All right, thank you so much. So I'll just sit down and enjoy, and then when you're all finished speaking, we'll have a dialogue again. Whatever you're comfortable with. I think that would be fine. Yeah.
Okay. It's been a really terrible year in the world in terms of refugees and the refugee crisis, as many of you know. Lots of you are probably most familiar with the refugee crisis springing onto international consciousness in August because of Angela Merkel's invitation to, in which she opened the borders to refugees coming to Germany, and then this started a pretty intense migration through Europe of people who are fleeing persecution. Having said that, I do want to say that for a refugee, it's a terrible crisis. It doesn't matter when or how many other refugee populations there are in the world, it's a crisis. So just because it's really bad right now in terms of the level of the crisis does not mean it's not been the case for other populations and people who have fled persecution. So I just want to acknowledge that. I started into the field of refugee resettlement in 2003. I had been a researcher the previous year at University of Arizona on refugee programs in Arizona, and then I started doing practice with as a volunteer for the first Somali Bantu refugee to arrive in Tucson. Then I ran a refugee resettlement program in Tucson, Arizona. And then I mentored 3 Somali Bantu mutual assistance associations in Texas and Arizona before coming to the state of Wisconsin as the state refugee coordinator. So that's a little background on me. I'm actually a medical anthropologist by training and have spent a lot of time looking at indigenous medical ideas and healing ideas. So that's been an important part of my professional background and the way that I think about the world. And I'm really pleased to have had that experience in coming into the field of refugee work, because it's helpful to sort of understand how people think about the world and about healing and health, and also about sickness. So I want to say that a refugee is someone who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of, there's 5 reasons: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group or political opinion, and is outside of their country of origin, and is unable to, or owing to such a fear, unwilling to avail himself of the protection of his country of origin. And this is a legal definition that is recognized worldwide. In 1951, after World War II and after all the refugee flows, the countries of the world got together in Geneva and established a convention of how refugees would be treated in the world. And so they also established the office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And now refugees can register with that office. People can register with that office as refugees as long as they qualify in one of those categories of persecution. And then if they're outside of their country, of course they have to be outside of their country to register as a refugee, but if they're registered as a refugee, they're protected from being sent back to their country of origin. There's actually about, I would say, well, in 2014, the count of refugees in the world was 19.5 million. What it is today, I can't tell you actually. I'm guessing it's 20.5 million. In terms of people who have been forcibly displaced because of violence and fear of persecution, that number is about 60 to 61 million in the world. So if you think about how many of those are refugees, the rest of them are internally displaced in their countries, forced to flee from their homes. But they're not outside of their country. They're called internally displaced people. They do not, of course, have the same protection as are afforded to refugees. So, an interesting statistic from 2014 is the number of people who were fleeing their homes, forced to leave their homes per day, which was 42,500 per day. We assume that this number is higher at this time. And that had quadrupled in 4 years because of all the conflicts that there are in the world, extreme conflicts in the world. Just in terms of Syrians, as of August 29th, 2015, here's the statistics. There were 4,088,000 or so numbers of registered Syrian refugees, people who registered with UNHCR. And the statistic that they were giving at that time was 2 million, a little over 2 million of these were in Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, and Lebanon. There was 1.9 million in Turkey and about 25,000 in northern Africa of those Syrians who were outside of their country of Syria. Of course, we don't know now how many are in Europe because people have been moving across borders to get into Europe. The situation is changing so much that when I was trying to get my dissertation out, which I finally got out in January 2016, my advisor finally said, you're not going to be able to get the statistics in because we don't know what they are and they're changing so drastically. So it's pretty chaotic. One of the things that you hear in the news is that Syrians coming to Europe are largely young men in their 20s that we need to be concerned about, or Europeans need to be concerned about. In fact, that is not true. The largest number of refugees who are Syrian are female, and it's 50.5% female, 49.5% male, and all across the spectrum of age. So there's families fleeing, and if you really look on the internet at the pictures of people fleeing, you can see families with young children fleeing. So I guess what I would say about that is it's an oft-quoted statement about what Syrian refugees are like and who's going into Europe and et cetera, and really challenge this in your thinking. You really need to look and see actually what is the count from official places. So refugees going to Europe, people who are traveling into Europe seeking asylum, are not going through the same situation that refugees who apply to the U.S. program. And in fact, in the U.S. program, refugees currently are vetted for 2 years through all kinds of security screenings, numerous interviews before they are accepted to the program to come to the United States. And then they go through a medical screening, they go through cultural orientation. There's a process, parallel process happening in the United States as to where they will go in the United States. So it's a very, very planned process. And this year, the presidential determination is that there will be 85,000 refugees who are accepted to the United States. This was increased in September in response to the crisis in Europe, even though the refugees who will be coming in from Syria, for example, are not those that are going into Europe. The president said that they would set the ceiling of 10,000 Syrians coming in this year. And these are Syrians who are already in the pipeline, who've already gone through 2 years of vetting through security. So that program and the security vetting that occurs for the United States not only makes it a very safe program, it's a very controlled program, it's a very planned program. But it is not immediately responsive to crises where people are doing these flows, because you cannot just get on the plane and come to the United States as a refugee. Refugees come to the United States, they have been in refugee camps, or they are also living in cities. And I think we have people here who've been in both circumstances, so maybe they will talk to you a little bit about that. The way that refugees get allocated across the United States is every week. There's 9 national voluntary organizations. They're called VOLAGs. And they're the resettlement agencies that hold cooperative agreements with the Department of State. And they sit around each week. I think it's Wednesday or Thursday. I can never remember which day it is. But they sit around, and all the cases that have been approved come to that meeting, and then they go round robin around the circle with the agencies and decide which agency will take which case for resettlement. And it can be a couple of thousand or more in a week, or it can be 500, depends on what's happened. So then those agencies go back to their offices and they allocate out those cases to local resettlement agencies. In Milwaukee, we have 4. One is Lutheran Social Services, one is Catholic Charities, one is Pan-African Community Association, one is the International Institute of Wisconsin. We just looked at the final numbers for approval this year because it has changed as the crisis has progressed, and so we expect in Wisconsin that there will be 1,500, a little over 1,500 refugees coming to Wisconsin. A little over 1,200 of those come to Milwaukee. The largest numbers coming into Milwaukee currently are refugees from Burma, and that's followed by refugees from Somalia, and then refugees from Iraq. We have, and then, let's see, in Madison, there's a significant number of refugees who have been living in Nepal, who are originally from Bhutan, and we also have quite a few Congolese coming into the Fox Valley area. So the resettlement sites in Wisconsin are, Milwaukee is by far the largest, Madison, the Fox Valley area, so that's Oshkosh and Appleton. There's a few that are coming into Green Bay. There's some who are coming into Sheboygan that are resettled there by the Charities in Milwaukee. And then there's secondary migrants coming into Barron County. Way on the west side, very close to Minneapolis, where there's a huge population of Somalis. So with the number of refugees in the world, we're thinking about 20.5 million. The United States gets, resettles approximately 50% of all the refugees that get resettled to third countries. The first choice is for refugees to go back home. The second choice is for resettlement into a neighboring country. The third choice is to come to a third country of resettlement, and of that, the United States resettles more than any other country in the world for permanent resettlement. So I'm almost close to my time, and what I would like to end with is a quote that I think is quite important for us to think about as we're doing this panel this afternoon, and for us to discuss over the next years that we are working on resettlement of refugees. By the way, we do have a Syrian family that has been resettled in Wisconsin, just so you know. And I expect that there will be more that come. So with that, I want to read you a quote from Renos Papadopoulos, who's a psychiatrist who's been working with refugees. And what he said is, "It is important to remember the obvious fact that becoming a refugee is not a psychological phenomenon per se." And I think this is very important because we get lost with refugees having PTSD, but it's not primarily a psychological phenomenon. It is really exclusively a socio-political and legal phenomenon with some psychological implications. So ordinary people become refugees because they are forced, directly or indirectly, to abandon their homes as a result of certain political and or military actions by some groups or by the state, their own government, and then they seek refuge in another region or country. Refugees are attempting to begin a new life using legal means in order to be allowed to settle in another location. In this process that leads from dislocation to relocation, and there's so much tied up with each of those processes, refugees have a multitude of needs. These needs are multifaceted and multidimensional, and they may cover the entire spectrum of human needs. From the basics of human survival, safety, food, and shelter, which we concentrate on in the first months after they arrive to the United States, to the higher ones in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, such as the need for love, belonging, status, self-esteem, and self-actualization. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Anwar Sallumi. I'm a former refugee from Iraq, Baghdad. So, to address the theme of this session, becoming and being a refugee, so I may talk about maybe some things which nobody heard about this from me before. Just a couple of things, and then the other things I'm sure that most of you know. I mean, my colleagues know that. So I'll go back to 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001. I was living and working in Libya these years. And then I had some friends from Iraq also who were working with me, and a couple of them were seeking asylum. Their goal when they were working in Libya, they want to go to Europe. So this is their ultimate goal. I was with them at that time. Actually, one of my friends was living with me at the same home at that time, and I was seeing him that he's preparing himself, he's trying to contact some people or try to apply for such to be a asylee somewhere. Anyway, so and he's now in Netherlands. He's a citizen of Netherlands. So at that time, when they asked me, "Do you want to be? I mean, try to go to Europe, try to be a refugee there," I said, "No, why? I can go back to my home." Actually, at that time, Iraq was under severe economic sanctions imposed by United Nations at that time, and there were a lot of suffering. But even it's still, Iraq was stable, a lot of security, a lot of good things, I was confident that no, I don't want to go anywhere. I want to go back to my family, to my people, to my country, and then I can serve there. I was confident that I can work and I can add value there. So I went back to Iraq in November 2001, and then life passed through. I was working there. There are a lot of good things, and then I don't want to talk about the war of 2003, but I just will jump. Let's say around 2006 and 2007, I was working with an organization. Also, we had at that time a partnership with UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So at that time, maybe you will get surprised, I was the manager of Syrian Refugee Program in Baghdad. So we had in Iraq, and still we have refugees from Syria, from Iran, from Turkey, from Sudan, from some other countries. So there are either camps for them or they are living in cities. So we had a kind of number of Syrian refugees living in Baghdad. I didn't mention Palestinians as well. So those Syrians, I was working, managing this program with UNHCR, supporting them after the fall of the former regime in Iraq. So there was no any support for this population in Iraq, and they were very vulnerable at that time, and a lot of them either kidnapped, killed, and also UNHCR or UN agencies, they had no, it's hard for them to work in Baghdad, in Iraq at that time. Anyway, so we had such a partnership, and I was working with those refugees at that time. And then I had, because of the severe situation and insecurity, instability in Baghdad, then I had to flee with my family in October 2007 to Jordan, seeking, and now I have to do that because there was no other choice. So I was seeking to apply for the U.S. Refugee Program. At that time, I had some goals. Why I'm going there now? So one of my goals, one of the main goals is to looking for safety, for security for my family and me as well. So, and in August 2008, we arrived in Wisconsin. So from first days, actually before that, even I was talking with my wife, that it is, we have to be ready for this because we may face severe and harsh circumstances. I don't know whether I can get a job. I don't know whether it will be, so she's ready for that because our ultimate goal is to, security and safety for us and our children. And then I got a job 2 weeks after arrival, but I couldn't start because I didn't have a social security number. But I started one week later. I know that, I don't know whether this is something new, that my family and I didn't receive any cash assistance as a refugee from W2 program or any other program supporting refugees till now. So I don't know how many refugees in the United States didn't receive any cash assistance. I don't know. Anyway, so I started working with Lutheran Social Services in October 2008 as a program coordinator. And but I was, of course, by the way, I didn't mention that I didn't have barrier for language and this thing. So I had a big goal that I don't want just to work and just running here or there. No, I have some other goals. I want to go to school. So this was one of my goals from day one. So, and Dr. Kalyani, if she remember, that I asked her when I knew her that she's working at UWM, I asked her, how can I apply for a school? How can I get, I want to go to study again and again. To make the story short, I joined to Cardinal Street University in 2010, and in two years later I got master's degree in management from Cardinal Street University, and then I got hired by the state in the refugee office. So I'm talking about these things, just I want to share with you that because there are a lot of stereotypes and some bad image or bad ideas about refugees, that they are coming here, they are ruining our society, they are doing this and that, they are taking our jobs, but actually there are many successful stories, and also my colleagues also, they are very successful in their jobs and their life. And refugees are enriching workplaces, they are paying taxes, they are adding value in their communities, supporting each other, and they are doing a lot. So that's it. I don't want to talk more.
Hi, my name is Barb, and I'm an attorney at Catholic Charities. And my perspective is very different because I'm from Elm Grove, so that's not exactly, we're not taking refugees from Elm Grove right now. But what we do is a little bit different. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the vetting process, the concrete vetting process, because there's this sort of underlying subtext that everyone who comes as a refugee is a terrorist, and we have to be really careful because they're scary, evil people. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about what you do once you get here as a refugee, and what we do to get you lawful permanent residency, and all the hoops people have to go through to kind of become part of the United States fabric. When you want to come to the United States as a refugee, first you identify yourself to the United Nations, then they do their initial assessment, then the Refugee Support Center collects all the documents and creates a file, then the enhanced interagency security checks are done by the National Counterterrorism Center, the intelligence community, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the Department of Homeland Security, and the United States Department of State. It's not like nobody's talked to you before you get here. Then the Department of Homeland Security and the United States Citizenship and Immigration conduct interviews. Then you get your fingerprints taken and they're matched against every database. And the databases are infinitely more inclusive than exclusive. So I, for example, on every client I have, regardless of there being refugees or asylum or family-based, we run an FBI fingerprint on everybody. And I get more back than I get actually sometimes that pertains to that client. I will get other people's stuff just because the name's the same. Then they do a medical check. If you have tuberculosis, they do things. You have to get vaccinations. Then there'll be a cultural orientation and assignment of location. The idea is not to have you be the only person from your culture in your city. Then you travel to the United States, and imagine you wake up in a refugee camp one morning, and a week later you're in Milwaukee, which you've never heard of. and you're now trying to navigate the bus, get a cell phone, your children are in school, it's an alphabet you've never seen before, it's a language you don't speak, I can't imagine. Then when you come to the United States, you have to apply for lawful permanent residency. And when you apply for lawful permanent residency, we do it all over again. We scan your face, a digital scan of your face, and it goes off to the Federal Bureau of Investigations, where they measure the distance between your pupils as the most unique identifier on your person, more so than your fingerprints. And that's why now passport and green card photos are full face photos rather than 3/4, because we want to be able to check the distance between your pupils to make sure you're not an international terrorist. Thankfully, I have no one who's ever been identified as one. Then we're going to take your fingerprints again, just in case between the time you got here and the time you apply for lawful permanent residency, you've done anything. Traffic tickets, anything that's a criminal arrest, it all shows up. Then you go for an interview. But when I ask you, when you start applying for lawful permanent residency, you don't know me at all. And you come in and you sit down and I start asking you all the questions about all the reasons we won't give you lawful permanent residency, even if you're already a refugee. So this woman you've never seen before is going to start asking you, hi, do you intend to overthrow the government of the United States? Are you a prostitute? Have you ever committed a crime for which you've not been arrested? And I'll have these really sweet, lovely 70-year-old women looking at me like, who do you think you are? But they have to, under oath, check every box and say, no, I'm not a prostitute, I don't intend to overthrow the government of the United States. I wasn't a Nazi between 1943 and 1945, even though I was born in 1974. So they go through all this stuff. And then their lawful permanent residency comes. But then our next job is to make sure that you stay on track to get citizenship, because as a refugee, there are certain social networks that are put in place to keep you safe. Those last for 7 years. No other immigrants except the asylees get those. Nobody gets anything. Lawful permanent residents, for the most part, get nothing for the first 5 years. They're qualified immigrants, but you don't actually qualify for anything unless you're a refugee and asylum. And as a side tangent for a moment, the difference between a refugee and an asylee is where you apply. Refugees are pre-processed from abroad and enter as refugees. Asylees enter some other way. And then they have to meet the United Nations definition as one who has a reasonable fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or this lovely amorphous little beastie called particular social group, which we use for domestic violence victims, the LGBT community. We use it for people who have family connections, who have been, their family members have been persecuted. But then we have to get you on right on the start to get your citizenship, because you only get those benefits for 7 years. And you have to wait 5 to become a U.S. citizen. And you've got to take that test in English, and that means the entire interview in English. So there's 100 questions you have to learn, there's vocabulary you have to learn, to write and to read. And then when you apply for citizenship, we're going to take your fingerprints all over again and take a digital scan of your face all over again. And if you lie on that form, we will take your citizenship away. So they go through that whole vetting process 3 times. Once to get here, once to get lawful permanent residency, and once to get citizenship. And then our goal is to help them also to get their family members here. When you're a refugee, the first 2 years you're here, you can apply to get other family members here in a much simpler way. There's a form you fill out, you send it off, and they will be here within a year, whether regardless if they're in a camp, if they're in a separate country. But that's primarily what we do on our side. And Patrick's going to talk more about the actual resettlement portion of it, which I don't do. We do more the portion of it that is the legal portion of it, trying to make sure that you get your lawful permanent residency and your citizenship on time.
I'll just stand here. I'm a little short, so people will not see me.
That's okay. Shorter.
Oh, thank you. My name is Omar Mohamed. I work with the Lutheran Social Services. I'm a case manager, and I am from Somalia. So you guys heard from Mette and then the lawyer. Now I'm going to give you a living experience of what it is to come here. I was a refugee, and I came to this country in 2004. And we went all these steps of screening that the lawyer was explaining, firsthand. Now, it takes a while, and as she said, first you're gonna meet a group of the supportive. We call it the GVA. So before you see the USCIS officer, you have to see them, and they will screen you. Basically, they're making a case for you. why do you want to go to America? They're going to make that case for you. When they write that down, and then after a while, you're going to wait until they post your name on the wall, and then after that, they call on you. That is when you meet with the DHS or INS or USCIS officer who will determine whether you qualify or not to come to this country. And then he's going to ask you every single question that was made by the GVA. If you do, for whatever reason, any discrepancy, you're done. And whether she's a male or a he or a she, she's going to tell you, I'm the one who will take you to America or who will deny you. I still remember that day. She said, I will be the one who will determine you whether you're going to go to America or not. So then what they do is not only ask the PA, we call it the PA, the head of the family, but they ask every single person who can speak. They will ask the question, the same question, is this your father, is this your mom, is this your brother, is this your sister? They'll ask all. When they ask that, and then they call the other person. If there's discrepancy, and then you're done. So after all of that you go through, and if you luckily to pass that, and then you go to medical, then they have to check medical if you're healthy enough to come here. Mostly if you got a TB, you have to be treated. If you certain amount of disease, especially like the community diseases, if you have those kind of diseases, it's going to take you a while to come here. To give you a perspective, I was hearing when I was very baby that we were going to America. I came here when I was 17. So all I was hearing is we're going to America, we're going to America. It took us about 10 years to come here. Now for us it was a special case because we were a group. As Mette says, typically it will take 2 years. That is if things happen as it is, like everything went boom, 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 it's 2 years. Otherwise, you're going to wait for a while. So that is how it went through for us to come here. Now, how do we get success? Now, when I was in the camp, was in Degale or the Dab camp in Kenya, we went to school. So we didn't learn a lot of English, but I know some of my language to write. So what I did was, I was with my auntie. She was the head of the case. When they were interviewing us, the first interview, I wrote every single thing she said. We rehearse before we go. Otherwise, if we just get a discrepancy, we're done. I have seen more people who are more deserving to come to this country, and they didn't come. Because of all the trauma they want, what they say like about 3 or a year ago, and then the USCIS will come officer and he's asking the same things. If you say or make one mistake, they'll be like, you are lying. I have seen a lot of people get denied for that. So coming to America, it's not easy. It's not like as we see it in Europe, people just going over the fence. That's not how it is. There's multiple steps to go through. And if you're only lucky, you come to America. Now, that is the process of coming to America. That's how I came. But when I came, like Anwar said, I could write a little bit, not a lot. Then I asked my caseworker at the time, who was through Lutheran Social Service, can I go to school? So they enrolled me in high school. I started high school, I was lucky. So English was not that easy, and I was like from the beginning. I remember my teacher teaching me basic stuff, twinkle, twinkle, ABC, things like that. I went to ESL classes. So when I was taught all of that, I forced myself. I was at Washington High School. Fortunately, I applied myself, and I graduated with the top of the class. That's where I got a chance to go to university. I went to Marquette University. Now, I graduated in 2013, and then I applied to UW. Now I'm in the UW Master Program of Social Work. Now, that is the basic of how refugee comes. And Mara explained to you how to become a refugee or why is a refugee, and that's how you come here. Now, coming here, when you come here, it's not easy. As the lawyer said, these people don't speak English. They don't know what is going on around their community. Most people point at them. They're distinguishable. You can say, he's a refugee, go back to your home. I've seen a lot of people saying to me, Africans, go back, why are you here? But to be successful, most refugees are patient because they went through harsher than just saying, hey, you're a refugee. As long as he can go home and safe with his kids, he doesn't care. So it takes a lot to become a refugee. And as the lawyer said again, when you are here for a while, you're not done yet. Because if you're a refugee, you're still like this. Once you make any mistake in this country, they can deport you right away. So it's again very critical for you to go to school, learn the English, make sure you pass the citizen test and get your citizen. At least then when you do some mistake, you will just go to jail and come back. So it's tough to be a refugee. So we can continue more if you guys ask more questions, we can give you further details, but that's how much I can give you. I mean, I can rant all day, but it's gonna depress you, I won't do that.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Thein. I've been working with Catholic Charities as a case manager for a little bit over 6 years. And when I was asked to join these panelists, I actually don't really, have idea what I'm going to talk about. So I don't really know what to talk about. But I also, at the same time, when they look at the topic, they say becoming and being a refugee. So I was like, okay, I'm going to talk about myself. I was a refugee, in December 2007. So yeah, I was a refugee myself actually. Yeah. So the first thing when I think about when you say refugee, so what comes to your mind, right? So refugee. So to me, you can see war, you can see murders, and you can see tortures. And you can see trauma and rapes and assault and persecution. So there's a lot of things happening in a refugee. So you don't become a refugee just, okay, I want to be a refugee, and then you become a refugee. No. Myself, I went through a lot of difficult time to become a refugee. It's not easy, but you have to live through that. So I just want to give you an example. We say refugee, and now we're in the United States. So let's say that a tornado sweep across your community, and then you lost your home, right? But you still have your land. Maybe you have insurance, and you can rebuild that. But in the country that we're from, once that happens, you can never go back again. Your life in danger. So all you can do is leave, nothing going with you. Empty hands, you headed to wherever it takes you to go. And your survivor always comes first. And you don't know when bad things is going to happen to you. And you just move on. But you're not alone. There's a lot of people, have gone through the same thing as you do. So that's why, we say, sometimes we think, refugee, like I may say, well, you are from Africa, why you come here? It's no, because we have no choice. Well, some people say that be a refugee is a choice. No, it's not a choice. You can't live over there. If we can't, we don't even bother coming here. We enjoy our life. You come to the United States, you have to learn new culture, new language, and to start a new life. So it's not going to be easy for anybody to start, or you have to start all over again. So, and if you're a refugee, once you reach in the refugee camp, you probably have food and medical supplies. But it's not going to be enough. It's crowded, it's a lot of people. They put you in the around the fence. It's in one place. You can't really go out. So they make you stay over there. You go out, you can arrest it by, the guard. They can put you like a jail, and you have to pay a fine, which is, well, they not allow you to go out to work. When you going to get the money, And there's no education system. You can learn basic, education, but there's no way that you can, be like a professor or whatever that you want to be. So you are stuck. You live in a camp. You can take whatever they feed you, try your best to survive in a camp. So yeah, like Mette said, you are asked to choose what country you want to come, and you apply. You want to stay, you want to go back, or you come to the third country. So it is now your choice. You want to go back, There's no security and the safety over there. So most people will say, no, you want to stay? There's not your country. You live in the camp in that situation. And you're not allowed to go out and work. So you probably say no too. But to come to a third country, you think about, I have to start all over again. It's not my language, it's not my culture. So what should I do, right? So either you come here, like I'm going to say it again, it's not easy. We have to go through a process. They scream you again and again. You can't even line one single word saying that. Just for example, one time you say, because there's a two different interview. The first time we call it, what is it called, OPE. There's an interview, they ask you, they create you, they make you a case. They create your cases. And they have on the paper everything written. And the next time you come back, anything changes, whatever you say, or whatever reason, you're not going to pass. So you may have to stay there maybe for the rest of your life. So it's not really easy to come here. And what I'm very glad to be here, actually, as a refugee. I came here as a refugee and maybe 8 years ago. And enjoying freedom in this country. It's great, right? I think we all deserve, the freedom and the safety as a human being. So when we come here and we have a refugee resettlement agency that help us finding an apartment before we got here, and apply for Social Security card, apply for ID, open a bank account, enroll children in school, and enroll us in the ESL class, and then find a job, and then for us to become self-sufficient. So it's good that if we don't, we as a case manager, and also as a refugee, I've been through a lot of this. That's why I decided to work with Catholic Charities, which is a Refugee Resettlement Program. So I know the refugee very well, how they have gone through. And myself, as a refugee also. So I try to make sure that they get everything they need, and the children go to school, they have a house to live. And also when we come here, we're not just coming in empty hands here. We come here with our debt, which is called travel loan, that we owe the government. Okay, the government loan us money in order to come to the United States. And then we just got here, we have a debt to pay it back. So we have to start looking for a job to pay our debt. And then we pay tax the same thing as everybody does. So, and also, I remember when I first got here, I have never heard about I heard about the United States, but I never knew what would be like, being in the United States. When I landed in Milwaukee, that was the first city, and I stayed here. And I saw a lot of snow, over the ground. I was like, what? What the hell? You mean, what was that? I have never been there. I've never been told that, I would be in such place. Snow about that time, about 2 feet, that high, So it's a kind of culture shock also, being here. Okay, so, we are here, but then sometimes this is very stressful when you work around people, and if as a refugee, people will think that, these people come here and take away our jobs and opportunity. Actually, when we start working here, and the job that refugees are doing, not a lot of people want to do. Like a meat factory, you cut water, your hands, all of that, and cleaning, housekeeping, for this, for the study, the job that we're doing, nobody wants to do it actually. We just need access to start a new life, and to have a better future. So we're not actually, and also want to call this country our home. And now I can call this country my home. And I want everybody to call this country as their home. So I think, having them come here and give them this opportunity, is best for everybody and best for us. So, thank you.
Okay, I'm short too, but I'll stay here. As everybody was sharing, my perspective of coming is more like being and becoming a refugee as a child. So, so this topic is really personal, and it's come from the heart. So it have nothing to do with my titles or the work that I do in the community. So just bear with me, because some of the stuff would be really hard to talk about. So I was born after the Vietnam War, and at that time, in 1975, when the Vietnam War, or they call it the Secret War, have ended, a lot of the top leaders, they have flew to Thailand, to the camp. And they have left many of us behind, which our dad is part of the soldier and, you know, serving with the American. And so it was a very tough struggle for me and my family. We have to hide in the forest because the Vietnam soldier was looking for our dads that was helping with the American soldier. And they were searching, you know, and we couldn't even stay in the village. So my dad died at the age when I was 4 years old because he got killed by one of those Vietnam soldiers. We were hiding from forest to forest, and they was able to chase after us, and they shot, and my dad died. And at that time, my mom had 6 of us kids. So, but during the time when we were trying to come to the city, 2 of my sister and 1 of my brother have died too, because the Vietnam soldiers and the Laos leaders, they have poison around the forest because they know that the Hmong community is hiding in there. So they flew, the airplane flew and they dropped in a lot of poison through the forest, so that when you eat whatever that you found, then the people get sick and they die. So 2 of my sister and our brother have passed away because of that. And so finally, my mom had brought us to the city, and she came and surrendered us to the city, to the village, and saying that, you know, everybody have died. It's just me. I'm not gonna hurt anybody, and I'm not against anybody. So they allowed us to stay in the city. And at that time, somehow my mom knew that she needed to bring us to the camp in Thailand to survive. And at that time, a lot of the women and children have come, you know, have came and surrounded themselves too. But what we have seen is that the prettier woman or the pretty daughter, even they're just 12, 13 years old, they would take it and they got raped. You know, they got raped by the leaders in the communities. And so my mom was very scared for all of us. At that time, it was me, my sister, and I have a younger brother. And she was very afraid for me and my sister. So she's always trying to look, to connect, see if she can bring us to Thailand. And so she finally found some people who came, some Hmong people that came from the camp in Thailand to come and help bring some more, leading the way to Thailand because of the, they don't know their way. So we were able to come, and as I remember, there's this one night, because it took us like 3 days and 2 nights to get it to the Mekong River. And so when we were trying to reach the Mekong River, I remember this night where there's all this shooting, and I can see bullets flying all over at night, and my mom was trying to pull us under one of those bamboo trees. And she got her foot cut very deep, and it was bleeding a lot. And at that time, I remember I was like praying. I was asking my dad to protect us, that that please don't take my mom, because that's the only thing we have left. So we finally, somehow we reached it to Thailand, and they put us in a camp. And a camp is not any villages. A camp is just more like a jail, just like Patra said. So there's curfew for everything. You have by like 10 o'clock, all the lights have to be off. Anybody walking on the street, then they're gonna put it, take it and put it in jail. And so when we get to the camp, they move up to 4 different camps, and we went through all the process as they were talking about, like the finger scanning, the picture taking, all the questioning, all those process over and over, because they have moved up to 4 different camps. And our final distant camp was in Philippines. We were actually the first wave that they did not have enough space in the Thailand camp, and they moved us to the Philippine camp. So that's where we learned our basic English, and our final destination where we came to Milwaukee. So when we came to Milwaukee, the reason we came to Milwaukee is because my aunt, my mom's sister, is already here from the first wave, which is like from the mid 70s to late 70s. So they came, the early wave. And so we were the second wave that come from the Vietnam War, from Laos. So we came in the late 80s to early 90s. And so we got here to Milwaukee in 1989. And at that time, I was 10 years old already. I was 10 years old. They put me straight to middle school. You have no idea what you're doing. You don't even know yes or no is. You're just sitting in the classroom, all confused. And I remember going to ESL, learning basic ABC. My ESL teacher drew a picture and showing us like the clown pushed the door, the clown closed the door, and so going up the stairs. So basic stuff. This is a table, this is a chair. And it took me a whole year to even understand the basic needs and basic language are going on. And after the second years, I actually just become the family interpreter. So like going to the hospital, applying for benefit, anywhere, my mom and my dad would just take me with them because now I'm becoming the family interpreter. And so that's basically it, and for a while, with the Hmong culture, conflicted with the American, culture and law. One of the things is that among people, most of us came from the mountain. So there's no law. All law is by what the man has said. And so when we came here, we don't know anything about rights. We don't know anything about law that protecting our family. And so there's all this violence going on, but we didn't know how to call the cop, or we didn't know how to go to court. That's not a process that we never knew about. And so it was really hard. And I also got married very young. That's something we don't know anything about the law too, that you cannot marry, before you're 18, right? So I got married very young. I would say like around 13, and going to school and having kids at the same time. And then as soon as I'm done with school, the family was like, no, you cannot go to school anymore. You have to work to help with your kids. So then I started working. Nobody questioned, nobody say anything. And then by the time when I started working, I actually pretty lucky because of me going interpreter with the family, going here and there. My English was pretty well. And then at that time when I started working, I got a really good relationship with my manager and them. So I started planning up the corporate letter. So then my company was able to pay me go back to school. And at that time, I going to school as IT networking because, as a mother with kids, it was like, oh, that's where the money is, So I went back to school as IT networking, and I got my bachelor on that, doing that work for 11 years. And then I realized, I don't like this job. All the kids are grown, I need a change. And I was like, well, I know I can speak Hmong really well. Because now in a day, a lot of Hmong young and youth they don't speak Hmong that well anymore because the lost connection of the culture and stuff. So I was like, okay, well, I know my Hmong, I know my English, I know how to read English, I know how to write Hmong. So I was like, okay, I think I wanted to work for the community. I want to give it back to my community. So then that's when I started coming and searching what kind of position in the community that I can do to help my Hmong refugee community. And so in 2010, I actually came and working with the Hmong American Friendship. I was working there as a youth coordinator and also the helpline coordinator, and that's where I coordinate the helpline. After that, I worked for 2 years there, and then I moved to Hawa. So I've been with Hawa for 6 years now too, and my position at Hawa is pretty much helping women and girls and their youth and their children that are going through domestic violence issue and sexual assault issue, and helping them navigate our law and our mainstream system where they can get help and they can be safe and just to be here for them. And so, like I said, it is a very tough topic. There's all this process, but because you're as a child, you don't know. All you need to know is just like, okay, I'm just following my mom. I'm just following my mom. They told you to go stand there, you just go stand there. And I remember this one time when there's like, well, when you go through the examination, you need to take all your clothes. And I was like, you know, I was refused to take off my clothes. And in our culture and traditionally, we don't do that. You know, as a little girl, you're always covered up, and then there's times there's like you have to be all naked, you know, and so it was really hard to adjust that. But I did remember my sister say, if you don't do it, then you cannot go with Mom and I to America, and I'm just like, but yes, that's basically it, and thank you for inviting me to be here. It was a very tough subject which I have never shared. And I'm glad that I'm here with the people that can understand. So, thank you. Your turn. Voice is not that.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so pleased to join this panel and the forum here and to acknowledge actually the work of these individuals. It's not an easy job. I really thank each and every one of you, and also thank everyone for your powerful stories that really made us think twice about what it is like to be a refugee or being a refugee or becoming a refugee. It's very important work. First of all, my job is to become a respondent, to respond to all the things that have been shared today. First of all, I would say that there are 3 ways I think one can learn about being and becoming refugees. 1, you have to be a refugee and live a life of a refugee. Secondly, you work substantively with refugees and the systems, right, that support refugees. Thirdly, you publish in journals, do some research, assessments, and that way you can also learn about refugees. So I am not the first one. I didn't live the life of a refugee, didn't go through the plights of refugees, but I am an immigrant. And I've also worked substantively with the refugee for the past almost 21 years. So what is the difference between an immigrant and refugees? That question comes to our mind, isn't it? So one of the things I see is both immigrant and refugees are constructed or defined by the Immigration Act, process of immigration. So how we are constructed is by how the government provides the immigration policies, right? the difference is that the refugees come here because there was a turmoil, because they were fearing persecution. The immigrants like myself came here of my own choice. So there is a difference because refugees come here with a tremendous amount of trauma experiences, which doesn't go the same way with the immigrants. So ultimately, when we are talking about the definition of refugee, which Mette did really well, we adopted the definition of the United Nations, UNHCR. So I would like to say that in this country, I would say that refugees are political immigrants, and the immigrants are economic immigrants. Just to make it simple, it's a group of political immigrants. And I think Mette gave us a good sense of thinking that refugees construction, it's a construct, and refugees definition, everything should be looked at in the larger context of what's happening globally. So it's always defined in the larger context. And I think this forum is very timely, in the context of what Mette shared about what's going on, the trends that's happening in this world, and all the humanitarian crises that are happening because of the refugees. But I also am very fearful about how we define and construct refugees in the midst of all of these things. Because first of all, the refugees are defined by the policies, but they're also defined by public opinion. The public opinion right now is that refugees are associated by some as a terrorist or as ISIS. So those are the kinds of things, what do we need to do to really understand deeply what does this mean to be a refugee and how it is defined, how it is constructed at every local community and also at the national level and also at the global level. So this is a very timely conversation. Secondly, I think the Anwar's thought about how he had to come from Iraq with so many different circumstances and finally came to Milwaukee with all the surprises, but also he found a way to sort of survive, but also thrive. And now he's at the state of Wisconsin, working in a very good way. But also, I have found him that he had brought himself as a refugee some of the social capital that really helped him tremendously to go through the barriers the most refugees have to go through, and became successful, regardless of despite all the barriers that he had to go through. So that was a really powerful experience. And Omar's issue is really right at the heart of my interest, which is the language, right, education, and pedagogy. He says the language that they have to learn in K-12 schools and also in higher education. I'm talking about language is English language. Without that, and it's an important aspect of being a refugee and becoming a refugee in the United States, you have to learn English. So the policies of language in the United States, and particularly for the refugees, has a dichotomy. On one hand, the policy says you have to have good English in order to get all the public assistance and just be on track and get the public assistance and also be self-sufficient. And self-sufficiency is a vocabulary that has been placed in the Refugee Resettlement Program. One way you have to be self-sufficient economically, but on the other hand, you also have to learn language. So the English language learning is, instead of just putting it in how you can get involved into the social fabric of the United States, the English language is being used as purely in the economic terms. So that is a problematic. So what I'm hearing, Omar and some other, like Patrick, who else? talked about, Va, all of them are talking about the language, because the language policy has some dichotomy that needs to be addressed. And what I see from my work is the language policy has legitimized some of the forces of discrimination. I call it the forces of discriminations. That's why people feel that they're marginalized, because the language is not given to the fullest extent, nor it's been used in a pedagogy that would be more respectful and be more relevant to the refugee experiences. And this is a huge issue, and it's also a part of my book, which is in the process right now, how language policies and pedagogies will influence the refugee resettlement. And I think I see that thread coming from every one of the speakers. The other thing that came up, and I think it came up very clearly, is pathways for refugees are very different to reach Milwaukee or in the United States. Every refugee, every group is coming in different pathways, and I think you made that very clear. Some had some experience, long-term experience in some camps. Some have no camp experience at all. Am I right? And particularly, people are refugees coming from Iraq and some other Middle Eastern countries have no experience in the camps. So those two groups might have a completely different experiences with them when they come to the United States, which means when the pathways are so different, refugee is not a monolithic term, nor a monolithic group. So this really made us question some of the things that we design or frame in helping refugees. And as an educator, and I know I've worked with refugees for 20 years, and the most notable programs I think I have done or have done with the refugee communities are 2 or 3. One is the large refugee teacher training program in 2000 to 2005 that really helped train 90 refugees from the 90 teachers from the refugee background to get licensed. And it's a huge partnership program. That's one of the programs that really gave me a lens to see the diversity of refugees and diversity of understanding, diversities of culture, diversity of tribal groups, the way they construct things, the way they learn language, and the way they want to access higher education. So that really brings us, especially for us, teachers and faculty or others, is our one-size-fits-all program, work with the refugees, and I tend to think no. I think every program has to fit the profile of the refugees because they are in a very different context. They bring different interests. So in my understanding or in my thinking, when the refugees go through these teacher training programs or any other programs in the United States, it takes a longer time to really articulate their goals. So that means we have a very different ways of teaching, different ways of learning. So I strongly recommend for us to really have a very honest communication, honest understanding, and honest way of thinking through between the faculty, students, teachers, or even communities to see what those issues are, what the barriers are, and so we might be able to find special or unique accommodations we need to make for this group of refugees. So that's another thing that was coming out from this panelist. Am I taking too much time? The other thing is language policies, and I kind of, I am touched by some of the stories that Val was telling us and the others as well. The refugee issues is not just a political issue, although it's a political group of people and political things, and I know our lawyer explained quite articulately how difficult the process is, how the vetting process is. It's an incredibly, extremely thorough but also bureaucratic process that they have to go through, right? And you and I would be so frustrated, and I know I have helped some of the refugees fill out some of the forms that I don't understand myself in any way, shape, and form. So they're signing the forms and not knowing what they're signing. So eventually what I will say is the cultural adjustment of these refugees is enormous. Lastly, I would like to say that, refugee is it's not what you see in the images in the TV and media and all this. It's an enormously an emotional issue. It's emotional issue, it's a guilt issue, it's also a fear issue. So I think it's important for us to really come up with some solutions of not 20th century solutions. Now things are changing, the refugees are changing. It's time for us to rethink and reframe what the 21st century solution would look like. How do we address this problem? Thank you so much. I'm sorry I took too much time. Thank you.
So thank you all for staying. We have some time for conversation. I just want to say that one of the things that I took away is that, as you were speaking about the intentional process that the voluntary agencies now specifically try to make sure that refugees are not dispersed to places that they're the only family in a particular town, that hasn't always been the case with the earlier Vietnam War refugees. In fact, the policy was to disperse people all over the country to lessen the burden on any one community. So in fact, some of the lessons learned from these earlier experiences has, made some policy changes. And so the new policy, refugees nowadays are placed in communities with their anchor families to support them. So I can speak all day too, but I'm not going to. We do have some time. Ahmed tells me we are scheduled till 5:30, so if you need to leave, fine, but if you don't, we have we're so fortunate to have our panelists here. I think here on campus, we don't always have this opportunity to interact with people who are out in the community doing the work, helping, individuals make sense of their new lives. So we're going to open it up for you to have a conversation with them. If there's a question you want to address anyone in particular, fine. If they're more general questions, let's have a good conversation with our panelists. Who has a question, comment? We welcome all. Don't be shy. Yes, ma'am.
So for Patrick, are you finding, so I know Mette said that there are, 1,200 refugees coming to Milwaukee a year or so, or last year or so. What percentage of those are Burmese that you're helping? Or coming, are there a lot still coming out of that number from Burma? And are they mostly Karen or?
Well, actually, I can't say specifically because our number is different every year. So we probably get this year for example 500, and then we might end up some from Iraq, some from Burma, or all of that. So we can't really predict what part of refugee we'll be receiving. So all we have is a number, projection number, and then we can, once they arrive here, we verify them, that we know, and who's coming in the country. So we can't really predict, who's coming. So thank you.
I do have a report that I actually wrote
about.
Yeah, you have. So there are some of those numbers that are, I think, very helpful to kind of see, but they're more nationally. So it's hard to disaggregate the data, but I know you have it at the state. Other comments, questions?
So let me just clarify that. We have it retrospectively. We do not have it prospectively. So the state does not know who is coming until they're here because it's a federal program. So earlier I said we do have a Syrian family here, and I expect that we will have more. I don't know that. I'm predicting based on what I'm seeing happening at the national level. But the state is not informed ahead of time because it's all done through the resettlement agencies. So, I can't tell you how many Burmese are coming in. There's a lot of the Rohingya ethnic group from Burma that are arriving right now in fairly large numbers of the Burmese population.
That's a really good point. People often don't understand such diversity and refugees from Burma. So,
right.
yeah.
Just curious, how resettling within a community of either Iraqis or Somalis or Burmese, given that they are all diverse communities in their own, how would it be more helpful? So are there internal tensions sometimes? Those who got jobs versus those who didn't, religion, gender? Anyone?
Well, maybe I can answer something about this. So I know that in Milwaukee, for example, there is a big company, Cargill. So this is beef meat plant. So they kill about, I know this is about 1,000 cows a day. And they need a lot of people to work on that. They have 3 shifts working on that. And so many people coming from Burma, for example, and also Somalia, they have a kind of background working at farms with animals, so it is easy for them to work in such environment. If you talk about from our experience, we saw that people coming from Iraq, for example, they refuse to work at this environment. So it is such diversity is something useful for the community in general. This is one example, but of course there are some other examples. So you can see that refugees can add value. They can, and we know many employers, hotels, some other employers, they like refugees. And they ask us, and I know that Ricardo and Mary are here. They are working also with refugee resettlement agencies. They know. And we know sometimes we receive some requests from some employers. They want specific population of refugee. They want this population or refugees in general to work at their facilities because they know that they are good ethic, they are good workers, they are clean and clear background, no criminals records, and they are just want to start and establish their new life with their families here. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah.
A part of, maybe.
A bit.
Maybe.
Well, there is a lot more difference in terms of the tribal groups, like Somali Bantu is a tribal group, and Somalis are two completely different. I would like to say they are completely different. So I think these type of differences and the variations are extremely important because the tribe, they had that conflict even in their own country, original country. And they bring that even to this place. So it's like indigenous group and the groups that have dominated them while they were in the original country. So that power difference is extremely important, and particularly for schools. When they want to ask for an interpreter, if the Somali Bantus are needing the interpreter and they somehow send a Somali interpreter, that's going to be a disaster. So that's the kind of things that can happen. And also there is a huge gender differences. And I can't remember the research that is done by someone, and I can get you later, I can't remember everything. The women have less mobility than men, refugee men, which is very similar to any other immigrant communities.
Okay, I'm going to add a little bit. It's based on, as we talked about, camps versus non-camps. So the refugees who came from the camps, their expectation is a little lower. So whatever they see, they were like, thanks, we didn't have these back there, so at least better. Versus those who came from the city or straight from their country. And they expect higher because they were in a higher position back then. Maybe they were a doctor, they were engineers. So they expect higher. They won't like to go Cargill or maybe just go to a hotel. They want like a higher position versus those who just came to the camps. They were in a camp or didn't have any opportunity or any job opportunity. They're here to just support their family. So you put them to Cargill, they're fine. You put them to go to the hotels, they're fine. So, and for the Somali Bantu versus Somali, and I am Somali Bantu. So the Somali group were the ones who were a little bit higher, or like the people with the power back home in Somalia. So they think when they come here, they think it's the same. I'm Somali Bantu, and I'm a case manager for both Somali and Somali Bantu. So I can see the differences when I resettle a Somali versus Somali Bantu. Somali Bantu, they're happy and fine. But Somali, they always have another expectation. So they don't think I can serve them their needs. So there are a little bit tension. But I tell them all the time, this is America, everything is the same. You can only be higher based on your education. I tell them all the time.
Thank you. I mean, that's really a good question. I just want to say that it's a little bit, we've been here a little bit longer, but, Southeast Asian refugees, I mean, in the beginning of our migration here, many caseworkers would try to get someone who would speak, a particular language, and it would turn out that it's a complete different group and different language. So people don't know, right? People don't know, so we make mistakes and then we learn. But, when you bring, there are these ethnic tensions abroad that people bring, and they sort of emerge here in American society. So sometimes you might have a Hmong family, and they would bring a Lao interpreter, and the Hmong family wouldn't speak any Lao, even though they're both from Laos. Right, so it's really complex. So I think that's a really good question, because it helps us. Those of you who work with families every day, you see the difference. But I think in the larger community, you don't always have that opportunity to learn. So you had a question?
I was just going to say, in terms of so the Burmese community also, I know there's like Karen, Shin, Karen, and there's Rohingya, and then Burmese. Is there a lot of tensions between all of those groups as well, kind of like Somali Bantu?
Well, actually, the most tension you will have between Burmese and among other ethnic group. So because right now, in terms of politics, the Burmese have dominated the country. We got they consider themselves above everybody. So wherever they go, they are higher. That's how they consider themselves. So like a Karens or all the minorities, when you got an interpreter like a Burmese, and the Burmese always tend to say, oh yeah, they speak Burmese, but sometimes not necessarily they speak the Burmese. Maybe just very little Burmese, and then they just say, okay, they speak Burmese, and all of that. And we have tension like that. And the same thing like with Rohingya, or other Chin or Mon or whatever group it is. But among the other ethnic groups, except Burmese, we all get along well. We don't really have a issue fighting or politics and all of that. But with the Burmese, we kind of have tension because of the situation that has been going for quite a long time, and it's still going until now. So yeah, it's really hard to put you can say that okay, we are equal, but the people mindset is working away because they have been suffering a lot already in the past.
This one may or may not relate to the question that you're asking, but in a larger scale it does. One of the things I found out is in the UW system, only Southeast Asian refugees are considered as minority groups, legitimate minority groups, which means the resources will go to Southeast Asian. And the South Asians are not considered as a minority group, which means the Burmese are in the UW systems are not considered as minority groups. So this issue, I brought it up several times, and this cannot be changed unless the community or the university will advocate for them and change the legislation, which is, I really ask each one of you to consider this, talk to your aldermen or politicians to change that, because we have Southeast Asian Center here to support the students, but that funding is only for the Southeast Asian. It's not for the South Asians. So this is a legal issue, but we need to address that as a community.
Sure. First off, thank you guys for sharing. It's great hearing your stories of success on all levels. And I guess my question kind of gets at that. myself, not being a refugee, but being part of the Milwaukee community, what, either like in coming over as a refugee or working with refugees, what do you find helpful in the communities that allowed you to be successful here in Milwaukee? What sort of strengths or connections were you able to build with the community, or what sort of difficulties did you have? Because we're all working in different aspects of the community, in education, in social work, and other things, and maybe specific to Milwaukee. So kind of from a host community level, what can help a person be successful?
So what's worked best for me and for the client that I have helped is that partnering up with the mainstream agency and doing training for them and letting them know that it's not about being cultural competent, but I look at more like cultural sensitive. So yes, you've been through all this training. Yes, you know about the people, and yes, you understand a little bit about the culture, but doesn't mean that you are better to serve them than me. Because I'm, the people. I'm from the community. I'm the one that doing all this following through, and I understand who they are, and I speak the language. So if somebody come to you as a Hmong person, if a Hmong person come to you and asking for resource or asking for help, I'm hoping that you have enough culture sensitive understanding that you won't be a better fit to help them than me. So that's why you and me need to partner up. So that when something like that happens, you just give me a call and say, hey, I have a client here, and this is what you see what you can do, and we could, co-advocacy or co-working together. That's the best route to help the clients successfully getting what they need and successfully, working together in the community. I am a big fan of partnering together. So that's why I work closely with all the agency. I actually doing consultant for some of the agency so that I can give them training to the agency, and I also be there when they have clients and somebody who they can call and ask questions if something come up. So partnering together is the best way. That's all I can think.
Well, I think one of the good things that receiving communities can, they like to communicate with the refugees or some specific populations of refugees. They want to know more about their cultures. They want to know more about, actually food is one of the good things. So they want to see what kind of food, we like this kind of food, we want to see that, and then a kind of exchanging ideas, exchanging information about culture, about how can you make this kind of food, so it is a good thing that when a refugee can communicate with neighbors or with maybe even co-workers about these things, and then they will establish such connection and relation. And then what I wanted to say that some receiving communities, they have interest to know more about some of those refugees, about their culture and other things.
Soccer tournaments. Doing fun stuff together. Space for meetings and celebrations are important. It's actually spaces in general that people can get together and do things. I do like the comment about food, because it's a universal need, and so people are universally fascinated with food. In general, I think that one way of analytically thinking about it is that refugees need, for the most part, to be relating in their bonding community and in their own ethnic communities. They also need bridging social capital into receiving communities. And so for that to happen, there has to be prolonged interaction that's meaningful between receiving and arriving community members. So how do you set that up is a big question, and how do you foster that? One of the places is that I'm seeing is in churches and church congregations. There's a lot of interactions that are going on there in mosques and other religious places. I would like to see us really concentrating on that issue so that there's community centers where people can go and have interesting interactions. We do have an elderly program for refugees in Milwaukee. Mary's agency, Lutheran Social Services, is one of the agencies that works on that, and so does Neighborhood House. And they do go to community centers, and they do all kinds of interesting interactions, and they are meeting people from outside of their ethnic community as well as being with people in their ethnic community. That kind of sort of fun and having meals together in addition to some of the things is, I think, really critical. Housing's another one. By the way, if you have any good ideas about housing, we're going to be convening a housing working group because we will be getting more refugees as time goes on, and it's an issue as time has come.
Well, I would like to suggest that if you have anybody who would like to volunteer for after-school programs, teaching English, math, and science, that would be fantastic. There is a Rohingya community center that's looking for volunteers to teach English to adults. This would be the greatest contribution one can have to the refugees. And one of the things from our department, we started the home-based literacy training. And when we go to homes, instead of asking them to come to schools and teach English, that worked out really, really well. Because a lot of the women got an opportunity to learn English because they couldn't get out because they have no transportation, no way to get to the English language classes. So when you go to their homes and teach, that really made a big difference. But again, the gender becomes an issue. So mostly women volunteers would be great for the women and male for the male. So they usually have two separate classes.
I'll just add one little thing. Also connection and information, because most of the refugees don't know what is their rights or what they can get from the resources that are available to them, and most of them do not know. So if you share with them, that would be grateful. Connections like telling them there's a library available. You can get a library card where you can take your kids to go and read. That's a connection. Telling them there is an after-school program where you can go do your homework. That's also resourceful. There are more after-school also programs here at UWM or at also University of Marquette. So those kind of resourceful or informational also helps refugee kids to become successful.
And actually, if the mainstream community reach out to their actually neighbors, for example, when I bought a homes, my neighbors are police officer and also both police officer actually, and we are coming from the background that our culture is really, we are shy. Let's just put it that way. We're shy to ask people to reach out to the people, and we're kind of afraid how people will respond. I think that if our neighbors, if they are like a mainstream community, welcoming community, reach out to the refugee, they will feel more welcome on that way, and also they will share, their story and like I want to say food or everything like that, because they are very nice and they really want to, talk to their neighbor, but they don't know how, and they're afraid, to ask. Even myself, like I said, my neighbor talked to me I talked to them a couple of times, but we're not really in that, connection, just like, real, neighbors. We're supposed to talk to each other all the time. We are in a, different direction, I think, because I'm supposed to, reach out to him, or he's supposed to reach out to me. We're kind of waiting. So refugee, and even though you ask them, do you want it? They say no, even though they want it. So you really have to, go to them and talk to them, and then more and more, and they become, become more friendly that way, I think.
And also this will clear a lot of misconceptions about refugees, about this ethnicity, about this culture. So such relations, such connections, such dialogues will clear a lot of misconceptions.
So it's the intentional
experiences, opportunities, creating those. But I just want to say that refugees are also, not all, right, depending on their experience, but they can also be very vulnerable. So because many refugees are also placed in areas where there's more affordable housing, and they can become very vulnerable to outsiders as well. So there's a lot of fears, I think, in refugee communities when people just come in. Maybe a neighbor might just come and knock on the door, but they don't know, so they're a little bit hesitant. So I think your idea about reaching out, going to more established organizations, and going through those organizations to have those opportunities to interact with refugees, to me seems the best route. Of course, neighbors can say hi to each other, but I think just randomly, refugees generally are afraid when people just come and knock on their door. Are there questions? People in general too, I think, not just refugees, but I'm scared when someone knocks on my door.
Well, thank you for sharing your stories, both personal and professional. My question is kind of related to the last one, where I was wondering if you could elaborate more about the community organizations that you're working on within the community, like NGOs and different women's organizations and so forth. You mentioned the mosques and religious institutions. I think that kind of civic engagement seems really important to address some of the issues you're talking about. And maybe I should just mention briefly, I'm in the Geography and Women's and Gender Studies program, and I've been working together with two colleagues with the Muslim community for a few years. And the Milwaukee Muslim Women Coalition, I think the woman at the Muslim Community and Health Center in Milwaukee, which is fairly new, addressing health issues within refugee communities, mentioning a few of the organizations you're representing here, right? So I was wondering if it would be interesting to hear from your perspective, your experience of working with different kinds of community organizations, religious or secular, about addressing some of the needs that we talked about today.
You would like to know which other agencies that are working with different organizations, communities.
On the ground.
Okay, on the ground, yes. There's St. Michael, which used to be one of the biggest church that worked with the Hmong community. And there are individuals actually from secular individuals. Like there's a guy named Barb. He has been doing this literacy program all over Southside, and I know Patrick knows him better than I do. He is an individual, but he just wanted to volunteer with the Burmese. And he has spread that news, and he's got his volunteers coming and really helping quite a bit with them. And there are churches in the South Side that is also helping. I can't remember that church, and it's a Lutheran church that is also working with that. And in the Bhutanese communities, they used to go to Hindu temple where they get more support culturally and stuff like that. So I think there are lots of churches and non-Christian, religious groups that are helping them. And Muslim is one of those that are really Muslim Coalition, the Women's Coalition, Jinan. Yeah. And it was so fascinating. I don't know how many of you were there. Last week there were about 300 Muslims in a conference in the South Side. I think you were probably there. And there were 100 in one of the rooms, and majority of them were refugees. And they were talking about how to vote and give your voices. And that was a very powerful civic engagement within this faith community. And it's so interesting, and it is eye-opening to see that for most mainstream people, that in a large room like this, on one side there are only women, and the other side there are all men. So it's kind of an interesting thing that you can see for that. And they were all, the politicians and the Supreme Court, state Supreme Court candidates who came there and gave them their, candidacy, and they're seeking the support for the upcoming election and learning about what is a vote and how you do it, what does it look like, and they were there. It was just an incredible powerful educational process going on there.
So it's a new collective kind of Asian American coalition that we're trying to get people out to vote. So it's in the project that you mentioned, Kaliane, the Burmese Immersion Project, that's Bob's. Burmese Immersion Project, and he actually had been looking for volunteers for some time. It's amazing. We had some classes here that they used for a while to get some volunteers. So it's individuals who just want to make a difference, and he didn't sit and wait for anybody to call him. He just went out and offered it. So.
And the Mohamed school that is in the 3rd Street, that's a Muslim school, but has about 91 students who are from the Somali Bantu background going to that school. And they have a lot of cultural programs, a lot of health clinics and stuff like that in that particular, it's a charter school.
I do want to mention also the different ethnic celebrations that occur that are organized by the communities. I was recently to the Karen New Year celebration. This was in January, I think, wasn't it? January, yes. And if people do not have a space to meet, it's a little bit harder, but they do go to different places. There is these organizations that are not necessarily housed anywhere, but nevertheless exist within the ethnic communities. And the places that you find them is when they're doing these celebrations. So I would encourage you to do that.
There is one community by the name of Maruf. It's started by young children, young adults, and they are doing a good job in the community. They're helping the newly arrived refugees, as well as doing multiple volunteering, cleaning around. So you want to check it out.
They actually have, someone mentioned housing. They have actually initiated a really interesting housing strategy where they have actually bought up a couple of duplexes and are helping refugees to settle into those. So it's interesting that initiatives have come up from the ground to address this.
Other questions, comments? Seeing none? Then oh, you do? Okay.
This didn't really come up, but in my research, what I saw with refugee resettling in Tucson right in the beginning is this intense need for orientation to the geography of the place that they're resettling in. And that includes the plant life, the animal life, and all the ways that the ecological systems function. A lot of the people who are coming as refugees were subsistence folks, and so they're very interested in what's going on in the environment. So if somebody wants to start a really interesting program for refugees, outdoor education would be a great one to do. And people do sort of do these small things. In Oshkosh, somebody wanted to take refugees fishing, so this became a big project that many people in Oshkosh and the resettlement in the receiving community sort of organized around, and they had a really fun time. In Tucson, the Sierra Club partnered with the agency that I was running, and they took refugees on hikes because you can get up into the mountains really quickly. And this became the favorite refugee activity in the city. So these kinds of things where people are getting out and getting to know the area, and I'm talking about the ecology of the area, is really, really important to folks. So if somebody wants to do that, please have at it. Mary?
I'd like to comment on what you said, because that is so true. The Refugee Program at LSS, and they hunger for Wisconsin history, and they really want to get out into areas in Wisconsin, like Old World Wisconsin and things like that. But recently there's been a story that came up that I just find so fascinating, that there were some people that were very concerned about the amount of snow that had gathered on the ground, and that they didn't want the kids to go out. And it's because they thought that there were snakes hiding in the snow. And then that led to information discussion about the fact that Wisconsin doesn't really have snakes of that magnitude. And that was really a great relief to them. But that dissonance between where you live and what your experience has been.
So several people brought up the issue of snow, right? So weather is something that everybody experiences, and it's a common ground. When I was picking people up from the airport and taking them to their apartments for the first time, they are just checking out the street signs. How do the roads go? What are the plants that are along the roads? Because they're looking for markers. People are orienteering very intensely in the first few weeks. So it can be very fun.
Oh, with that note about snow, on April 13, 1980, my family arrived in Minneapolis, and there was still pile of snow outside. And the interesting thing is that during the war, we were so hungry. We didn't have salt, right? We were so hungry that we were so short of salt. When we saw that pile of snow, we said, we won't be hungry. We'll have salt. But it turned out to not be salt. So with that joke, I'm going to maybe turn it back to Kenan and Ahmed to maybe say a few words, and then we can end and enjoy our weekend. Ahmed?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything to say. I'm just very pleased with how it all went, and I'm very affected by the stories, and just want to thank you all for coming and teaching us a lot today.